here we are. We've been welcomed into the home of Abdi Assadi this morning. I'm delighted to be here. Very kind of you, Abdi, to welcome us in here to talk about, I guess, my spiritual journey, your spiritual journey, and the spiritual journey in general. I think I met you in 2012, April of 2012, you said?
April 10th, 2012.
April 10th, 2012, and my recollections of that, I mean, I was totally distressed, man. I was lost. I did not know what was happening. My world had been turned upside down. A friend of mine that was trying to help me actually found a video of you online. I think it was Wake Up the Film, where
That's right.
there was a guy in that film,
Jonas.
Jonas, that had some, I guess, paranormal activity that happened with him. And I remember seeing the video that day and thinking, I gotta get in touch with this guy. I need help. And I'd been in distress probably for quite a few months at that point, and I was running out of steam, man. I didn't know where to turn. No one knew what was wrong with me. And I think I reached out to you through email. Do you remember?
I do remember. It was the email, yeah, because we weren't really doing the phone stuff then. It was email, and from what you told me at the time, because you had really had this, the Kundalini experience, which we'll talk about, is quite a disruptive element to the nervous system. It really disrupts the nervous system, and it really disrupts the typical daily cognitive functioning. And you are in the midst of that. For some people, they hear voices. For some people, they can't sleep. For some people, literally the nervous system is on fire. You kind of had all of those premonitions, for lack of a better word. People get these psychic abilities. But for someone who doesn't have a spiritual background, meaning they haven't been training 20 years in it, or deep meditative practicing, it's very disruptive. It's very, very disruptive. And you were in the midst of that, I remember.
Yeah.
You were like, am I crazy? Is something wrong with me? Right? Do you remember that?
I do, man.
Yeah.
I remember it playing.
It's heartbreaking to observe, but I also knew you'd be okay because I'd seen it enough times and I'd experienced it myself. But what you really didn't have a place to put it. And I remember that was really, as it does for everyone, it's actually very scary. It can be it can be. In my experience, for pretty much everyone I've ever come across in 40 years, it's quite scary in the beginning. Because you also feel like you're going crazy. And to kind of hold down a job in the middle of all that and function day to day, it's very difficult.
Sure. So what would you say, in your experience, is the difference between, say, someone having like a Kundalini experience or some other kind of spiritual experience? I mean, how can you differentiate it from actual psychosis?
That's a great question. So it's actually very similar. So as someone, I can tell you, being around people, for example, in Bellevue, there are many people that I've come across who can have a Kundalini experience and then it becomes a psychotic break. Part of it is how they're being treated. Part of it actually is because people can have real mental instability, right, to begin with, and then something like a Kundalini happens, which Kundalini in traditional terms is considered a spiritual awakening. The actual term, as me and you have talked about in the past, the images of a snake that comes around up the spine as it hits the different chakra systems. Chakra, Sanskrit name for wheel. It awakens specific energies, but it also affects certain emotional energies that are stuck there. So for a lot of people, there's an amount of terror, which is when it comes up these lower chakra systems, and whatever is actually stuck there, it forcibly forces it through. There's a lot of terror in there. The difference between someone with a psychotic break is they actually cannot reform. Whereas with Kundalini, it's partial break and people can reform. But a big part of it is also how people are being treated. Right? Traditionally, if you were in some indigenous culture and you had that experience, you wouldn't be treated as a crazy person. They would give you 3 months, 6 months, put you somewhere, people would take care of you, and you would reform. The difference with ours is it's seen as someone who doesn't fit into culture, so then you're medicated with Jesus, and that also really affects things. So part of it is how you're being treated, but it's also part of what's going on with the person.
Yeah, you mentioned the snake climbing up the spine. Now that seems to be traditionally the symbol of Kundalini. And I remember when my Kundalini first activated, and I didn't know it was Kundalini at that time. I mean, I was many months into the experience before I even heard the word Kundalini. But I remember having these nightmares every night where I would end up in the snake's mouth, where it would bite me, and I really did think I was going crazy because it was a repetitive dream. It wasn't the same dream every night, but there was dreams of snakes. And I actually just spoke to a lady recently who she's not sure if she has Kundalini or not. You know, she's had a really tough path for many years, but she's now began to have the snake dreams. I mean, what would you say to someone who's not sure if it's like a spiritual opening?
It's a great question again. So, a couple of things. My own training with the Jungian background is in archetypes. So it's very interesting having been around many people with Kundalini, how this snake imagery comes up. And these are all the people that I come across with, except for one, I would say, who was actually an Indian chap, were Westerners. So they didn't have this sort of historical visuals of a snake or Kundalini or the spine, none of that. Everyone, including myself, had these snake dreams. So that's something very interesting, and I feel these are archetypical. To answer your question, end of the day, does it even matter? Well, yes, if you're going to have a psychotic break and you need to be medicated, I would say yes, but for majority of people, anything like this is an invitation to question reality. Is this reality all there is? Like me and you were talking about before, according to who you talk to, the five senses perceive anywhere as little as less than 1% to up to 3% of electromagnetic phenomena. Meaning what we perceive as solid in reality is literally less than 95+%. So what is on the other side of that 95%? So I would say whatever it is an invitation to question reality, not to drive yourself crazy. But we live at a time where people are in so much pain. You know, whether we're living in an abundance culture or we are materially abundant, the level of pain, dysfunction, neuroses, nervousness, anxiety, something is not working. So I would say it's an invitation to see what's underneath it. And then in your case, as is the case for people who really had the real deal, it's not even an option. Right? Those of us who've had it, there definitely were many days, probably more than that, we're like, can we take a break here? Can we just sleep tonight? Can we just not have these dreams?
Sure. Yeah, man.
Is that your question?
Yeah, it does. You know, the invitation thing, it doesn't seem like an invitation at the beginning. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh my God. It's because like literally in 1 second, there was a gush of energy come up my spine and my whole reality, my whole world changed, man. And my life has never been the same since that. And it's leveled out and, you know, I remember the emails, you're okay, brother, you're safe and protected, you're good, you knew I was good, I didn't, I trusted that you, I'm like, at last I've found someone that knows here, you know. So
when I say invitation, I should clarify that. The ego never is going to invite anything that disrupts it. But the ego can be miserable and it won't change anything. So it's really something bigger than that. So when I say invitation, it's not my brother here, it's whatever in the unconscious that wants a shift. Now, I can tell you from my own experience, I've said this to you before, 6 months I didn't sleep. I literally was so afraid to sleep. I was like young in my 20s, but it's such a frightening experience. So it's not to whitewash it, like, oh, it's wonderful. And end of the day, I mean, would we rather just life be like this? I'm pretty sure everyone we speak to is going to say that. So when I say invitation, I mean, it's actually not the ego that invites it. Soul, for lack of a better word, the bigger part, right? But no one wants disruption in their life. But meanwhile, most people that I treat are basically, without being conscious of it, on the verge of some kind of panic attack all the time. It's just if you're successful because you're making money, then it's not a question. If you work 20 hours a day, it's not a question. But why are you working 20 hours? Because you actually can't slow down. You know, what is that thing that the drive after one more zero, or one more sex, or one more plate of food? Most people are really functioning high anxiety. Right?
Sure.
So it's just not known. So what happens with the Kundalini, there's a part of that too. This good gush of energy, as you beautifully described, really makes you realize, like, well, what's underneath here? Right? And if you kind of scratch the surface, all you got to do is look at the culture right now. But if you scratch the surface, underneath it, there is that rot happening because people want to keep it this way. But this is not what's really working.
Mm. Yeah, there was like an explosion of these different parts of my subconscious come up with it. Mm. And it was hell, you know, and there was a lot of fire. Yes. There was like warrior's energy. There was like, you know, and you know, you made a really good point there about the ego. You know, I mean, the ego seems to be the only problem in the whole experience. Because I recall my ego scrambling through all the filing cabinets of my life to try and power this up or something. And it couldn't do it, man.
So that's a great image. So I can totally relate to that. I know my own experience when these dying process that happened with the Kundalini, but later on when I started working with medicines, like hallucinogens, it was the exact same thing. Except instead of being in mine, in your case, months and months, it'd be like, oh, a 12-hour window, 14-hour window. Where the death process, the dying process, which is, the ego obviously isn't real, but it seems so real. But as he was dying, it would be exactly what you beautifully described. If you go through all these file cabinets that is through life and lifetimes really has kept and going like, this is real. See, here's one real experience that opens the other cabinet. Here's one real experience, as opposed to like, oh my God, so who is this thing? What is this animating force? This is not real. That's a very terrifying experience. Now, a lot of old school cultures worth their salt had a dying experience, to prepare you for the time of transition comes, but also so you could live more fully. But this stuff sounds very morbid. Think about the experiences you've had. Think about someone who's never even looked at these things, and think what happens at a moment of death. As a guy who spent decades sitting with people as they're dying, trust me, like, all the stuff that you had to experience, which was not pleasant, I had to experience, that pays big dividends when that time comes. But again, not just as a morbid thing, it also makes you be here more. Right? The fact that here you are, you've driven 2 hours with your lovely friend, and to come and to make sense of this, and then out of the love in your heart to share it with other people having this experience. Somebody be set for that. That's because you had your head handed to you 12 years ago. Sorry.
I did, man.
Or like literally.
That's what happened. I had my head handed to me.
Yeah.
The rug was pulled, man.
Yes.
And
Yes.
you know what's crazy is, man, like when people like yourself started to validate what was happening with me, you're not going crazy, you're okay. And sometimes I started to believe that more and more, but then there's so many tricky cul-de-sacs. Like after that, there's this different part emerged in me that you're enlightened, Adrian. You're enlightened. And I mean, looking back in hindsight, that's ridiculous because I wasn't. But, it's like mistaking the last part of the path for the first part of the path, or the first part of the path for the last part of the path.
That's beautiful.
And that can be very tricky, man.
So I love you're hitting all the points, brother. So this thing that you're saying, literally, everyone that I've ever treated who has had Kundalini, myself included, has that, where this ego kind of gets, it's genius, right? The ego hides underneath the guise of enlightenment. But this is also a very common experience with all the medicines that people are doing, ayahuasca, not MDMA as much, all I've seen with that too, certainly psilocybin, where again the ego, it's amazing, gets hold of this thing, like, oh, I'm dying, acts like it's dead, and then pops up like, I am Jesus Christ, I am Buddha, that's a very common piece, and that has to get beaten out of us. For some people it can be years, for some people it's a matter of months, where you kind of feel that. Now, there's also a part that you have to give credit where credit is due. There is an awakening process that's not reversible. So yes, we're not enlightened, but it might take decades, and it does take decades. But there's also a never going back. You're never going to see this as solid again. I don't care how many decades goes back. I know people who shut it down, 20 years later it comes back and visits. But you can never really go back once you're given that. So the terror is real, the suffering is real, but the gift of actually having your vision from being here to this is also very real.
Yeah. Something I've often wondered about, and maybe you can shine some clarity on it. Are there people that have Kundalini experiences and they're temporary? Even though they may be transformative, it doesn't put them on say a path of awakening?
Are you asking?
Yeah.
Absolutely what you do with it. I mean, my experience of it is that these things are kind of predestined. They happen at a very specific time, but it's free will down here, in here, whatever word you want to use for it. So what do you want to do with it? Do you answer or do you not answer it? But I could say that about cancer. I can say that about a terrible divorce. I can say that about going through a windshield of a car. How do you answer these things? The ego has its momentum. It never wants to change. It wants to keep things the way it is from day one to whenever the exit stamp is on a passport, when the death time comes.
Mm-hmm.
Question is, how do you answer it? So one of the curses of the Kundalini things, it can be very painful. The gift of it being really painful is you can't actually shut it down, where the questions really come up. But I would also say that for people who seek spiritual knowledge, it's a very painful thing, right? And I don't know about your experience, my experience was very painful. I wanted to know, it seemed to be something morbid. You can't make a living when you chase that. You got all these charlatans running the show. So you sitting here with me asking these questions, so obviously the snake really bit you good because you're really engaged with it. I think that's wonderful.
Yeah. I mean, I was forced into it, man. You know,
That's the point.
I think I went through a period where I was just obsessed by it. Kundalini this, Kundalini. And I see other people do that where they change their name to, you know.
Yeah, Mukti.
You know, Jimmy Kundalini now he's on Facebook, you know, and that's fine, you know, whatever. But I think it can become like too much of an obsession where you kind of get removed from life a little bit.
Yeah, so see, you have such a beautiful heart. I've known you for a long time. And this is the thing I always bring up. So we're not judging. I love that, Jimmy Kundalini. It's a great punk name, man. I gotta start a band. So Jimmy Kundalini, like, we're not judging it, but it's about discernment. So I know your heart's so pure, so I know you're not judging it. I'll say this about Jimmy Kundalini is the discernment of it is that's what's really scary about this thing, and even that's perfect. But we use something that's an invitation to wake up. We use it as another sleeping pill to go to sleep deeper. So it becomes a Valium, as opposed to it can be something to actually be a cup of coffee to wake you up, get it on your day. It becomes another Valium. That's what you're saying. So discernment of it is that's also the ego is incredible. Now, end of the day, like me and you always talk about, everyone's going to wake up. Time is an illusion. Everyone's going to wake up. But what we're talking about is like, isn't it interesting? The cup of Joe is given to you, but you're like, I'm going to dump some Valium in this thing, pass out. That's what that is.
Sure.
And remember, no one really wants to wake up. Unless you really have suffered through life and life's got you in that lock and you're like, ow, ow. No one wants to wake up. So that's also why Jimmy Kundalini really has that following that we have. Where someone like you is like, hey, here as it is. This is really difficult. This is the hard part. That doesn't sound well. So as a guy who's been a healer for 40 years, I learned that really early on. Right? Like people don't really want to know. Right? It's like not people as per se, as a cultural gestalt. It's incredible our level of denial. It just doesn't. It's still right now, literally 40 years this year that I've been practicing. It still blows my mind sometimes when I see whether people personally or as a group energy, they just don't want to wake up, even if the suffering is so intense. And bless them, but it's a fact.
Yeah, it sounds like a cool thing to wake up, but when you get down to the nitty gritty of it, and you talk a lot about that in your book, Shadows on the Path. And I recently read your other book, The Healer's Handbook, right? They've been godsends to me, both of them. And I started reading your book again there recently, and there's a part in it that really kind of like rung a bell with me, is that people are having these Kundalini activations and, you know, deep spiritual experiences, and they've been on the path with it, and they've been trying to navigate it and stuff. And then they kind of seem to, like out of left field, return the addiction and stuff again, man. You know, and that's something that, you know, in my naivety, you know, that's something that I wouldn't foresee. You know, when you get all this like wonderful energy and these, like, I call them paranormal experiences, but they're really normal experiences, me today. And then all of a sudden, you know, you get hit with a curveball out of left field.
So, me and you as is it okay to share?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so me and you as recovering addicts, and I like that term, recovering addict, even that doesn't hold water for me anymore because I don't know anyone in this culture who's not an addict, right? It's just like, so people like us, like, oh, we use hard drugs, alcohol, yeah, but it's like, this culture is a culture of addiction. You know, that thing that you said, where you have this moment of very clarity, I'm seeing that all the time now with these shamanic practices, now people doing medicines and all that. So what took me and you 6 months, 9 months, and we suffered with it, they'll have it in a weekend. So it's not as elongated, they don't have the suffering, usually they bypass that, they go right into like the nirvana state and they crash. You have this moment of really thinking, yes, this is real. I totally hear you when the addictions come back, and I don't know if you experience it from what I know of you, it's similar, it actually comes back even stronger. Because you have this moment, you think like, wow, everything is lifted, and I don't care about anything.
With me, it's like nicotine and, you know, bad eating habits.
Yes.
You know, stuff that I thought, actually, before the Kundalini, I had that stuff out of my life.
Yes.
You know, and now it's like, you know.
Yeah, so that's the thing. It really brings stuff up from a deep unconscious level to be healed.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my experience as well. So some things actually lift up. It's very interesting. I've met people who, whatever, they have like a sugar thing, they have a Kundalini thing, they don't have anything, but then the next time they're smoking again. So also the anxiety thing can be underestimated. And then the level of trauma you've had, someone like yourself, someone like myself who had these very traumatic childhoods. Also for us, the things that come up are really profound. But I see it with other people too. right? So it's not, again, it's what I always say, we've talked about this in the past, it's an invitation if you want it to be complete. I have never met someone who's had a Kundalini experience and is complete. I met a chap who became a very famous teacher, was already a famous teacher at the time, who really said that he had gotten complete. And all of a sudden his addictions had lifted off. But, you know, he was a totally unmoored human being. Like, the addiction had moved from one thing to another. This was a person who was affecting, like, you know, working with a lot of people. It was, like, really painful to watch. So, in my experience of everyone I've come across, and it's been quite a few, you gotta just roll the sleeves up still and just struggle with it and work with it. And this is what I always say, psychology is a part of it. We're hyper-individuated beings. And as hyper-individuated beings, we have a psychological aspect that really has to be dealt with. And, you know, you yourself, you know, from your own work, that's something you've had to really do, certainly my experience. So not just the spiritual with the meditation and all that stuff, but actually getting into the psyche and, you know, like, what else is affecting that addiction of choice.
Sure. You know, what about, you know, like we're Kundalini and awakening when it comes to a certain point and it starts to remove things, because I've learned that the Kundalini has different phases. You know, it has this fierce side where, I mean, it's taking shit from you, man, you know? And it might be family members, it's going to be friends, it could be a marriage, it could be a job, you know? And it has this intelligent side to it where there's like a guidance. And I mean, it has many other sides, but what about when it really challenges like social structures, like maybe church? Or maybe say someone who's been in a 12-step program for 20 years and all of a sudden now they have all this crazy stuff happening to them and they don't resonate with the language. And I've found through my own experience and some other people that I've talked to, they're kind of stuck between two worlds. They have their old mentors saying they'll get back in here with us. Yes. And then they have like the Kundalini or the spiritual path or the still small voice that's kind of, it's not really clear yet, but there's this deep feeling that, no, I kind of got to keep walking this way. I mean, what's your experience with that?
A lot. I mean, you're hitting all the nails on the head here, brother. A lot. It's very difficult because let's say, for example, in the case of a 12-step program, my own experience with that, it's an amazing program, right? Myself, yourself would be dead if we didn't have that in our lives at a certain point. There comes a time where, whether it's that or certain friends or certain groups, this is very tricky to say, but it's what Ram Dass really used to say, the old teacher, he would say, like, with a 12-step program, if you're constantly in a state, not someone who's like 2 days out, but he would say after like 10, 20 years, if every day you come and say, hi, my name is Abdi, I'm an addict, are you putting that in? Are you still an addict at 20? At 10 years of in, I still was. 40 years out, no, I'm not an addict on that level, and my awareness is there. Now, am I going to say that to someone who's got 90 days under the belt? No, because I've literally treated people who died because they left the program or didn't have program. Many, because that's what I did as an acupuncturist right back in the day. At the same time, there comes a time where maturity, you have to really follow your path. That's very tricky. If you've been in a program, if you've been in church, something that for 20, for 30 years had your back, but now those people are saying, hey, you're crazy. At some point, you have to really sit with yourself, have an honest inventory of what your experience is, talk to higher power, whatever that language is. Sometimes the answer is very difficult. I never tell people what to do, but certainly just the thing that you brought up, both in terms of religion, in terms of the program, I have to struggle with it, but I've treated many people who have to struggle with it. Now, that pastor, that rabbi, that mentor, that person, your sponsor, they mean well. These are not bad people. Some are a little crazy, but they're not necessarily bad people. But is it really their intent you have to listen to? The one thing I would say, and me and you have talked about this many times, your gut knows. So you might not be ready to leave that church, but your gut knows, like, I've outgrown this. There is a thing of growing in the spiritual path. That's a part. Now, part of it is that you have to sit with it till you know 100%, because once you know 100%, you actually can't fit there. You can't jump before the fruit's ready. The fruit, when it's ready, blocks off the tree. But also, you don't want to sit down there and rot on there. So once in a while, just give that fruit a little tug. That's the part of it. Again, that's really scary stuff. Just like think about a relationship you might be in. You might be in an intimate relationship when the Kundalini comes in. You just know it's wrong. You kind of knew, but you shoved it behind, and maybe you were drinking through it, or drugging through it, or shopping through it. But then when you have this awakening, you're like, this person's not good. Like, they don't give a damn about me. Not that you know anything about that. Not that I know anything about that, but I've read. You know what I mean? And then it's just like, boom. So it's kind of like that. Now, not to belittle it, man, this is really serious business. If you've been in a group that's supported you for 10, 20, 30 years. But, you know, me and you both as guys have been in relationships and been divorced, there's also a part where like, things when they meet and they're complete, you don't just stay in them. You know what I mean? It's just like not complete. If I need to go to sleep tonight, I'm not going to sleep in these clothes. It met its need. I have to wear these for 12, 15, 16 hours. Now I got to take them off. You have to listen to that. The one thing I would say about any spiritual awakening, everything you need is there. You don't even have to figure it out. You can actually go into meditation and ask what constitutes right action. I ask what constitutes right action. Adrian doesn't need to know it. Just like, I don't know. This feels really weird. Please show me. I'm not hearing it. Show me, I'm not here. That experience actually really opens the door. And then, if you get the answer, hey, you gotta leave. I don't have the courage to leave. I'm really scared. Ask for that.
That's one of the things that I got from you, and I recite it every day, is, you know, please burn off what no longer serves me, slowly. That's the key part, right? Slowly. I don't want any more explosions, and help me to remember who I am. But what I'm picking up from you here, and I can kind of combine it with my own experiences, at a certain point in time, the trauma has to be dealt with. And so would you say that when the trauma heals to a certain point, that the addict or the alcoholic or whatever, you know, whatever the addiction is, it thins out?
So well said, and I love the word. It thins out. It doesn't go away.
Mm-hmm.
Because we live in an addictive culture. And we're all base anxious. Survival. That's just how this this nervous system is designed. It thins out. It also loses charge. It loses that heat of it. It doesn't necessarily go away. But you realize it. And then you realize when the addictive impulse is up, you're like, what's going on? Oh, the halt stuff we talk about in the rooms, right? Hunger, anger, loneliness, tired. But also other ways. Like, man, I didn't want to go to church. This guy's not right for me. Or like, I need to find a new minister. I need to find a new sponsor. You will notice, you'll connect it. Like, this is not happening in happenstance in a vacuum. These behaviors led to me really being agitated today. Really craving to spend money I don't have. Really craving, even though I'm not going to smoke, I want to have a cigarette or have a drink. Like, that stuff is connected. It's not happening in a vacuum. You start connecting it. And you said it beautifully. Yes, it thins out. But also there are behaviors that make that. I mean, what is addiction? You want relief. So what are the things that you've done? Again, people, places, and things. What are the things you've done that made you really agitated? That's part of what happens with the trauma work. And I always say this. It didn't make sense. So some of my teachers who were very much steeped in their own tradition, whether it was like Japanese or Indian, or from shamanic tribe, it didn't make sense to them psychology. One thing I learned, that's why I wrote Shadows on the Path. Man, you got to deal with the psychological aspect. We're psychological beings as Westerners. This has got to be dealt with.
Trungpa Champa is a perfect example of that. That's what comes to mind when I hear that.
Crazy wisdom.
What a message carrier, but what a death he had.
What a death he had, and then the people that were following him, and the one cat that gave AIDS to all these people because he was, so that can get very confusing as it was. It's crazy wisdom.
Would you say that's trauma?
That's definitely trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The crazy wisdom thing is something I really struggled with because I was into Milarepa and all these like wild Tibetan. They're like punk rock, right? Milarepa was like Sid Vicious. It wasn't, some of these other ones were like the Beatles. That crazy wisdom school is like serious punk rock stuff, but when you get into it deeper, it's like, I don't know if that makes sense. Because some of this crazy behavior, and the thing I always talk about, PMS, power, money, sex, is abused in spiritual communities, that part is all trauma. Right? It's really, really trauma. And that came up over and over with my Zen teachers, with yoga community, with martial arts community. Power, money, sex, where the person in power hadn't done the inner work, and would one of those things or three of them usually together would come up. Right? So that's trauma. That's trauma. And for us as traumatic people, we're looking for a mommy or father figure. Right? So then that we give all our power over. That's changed a lot in the last, I would say, 20, 30 years, but it's still there. But people are getting wise to it.
I've seen that in myself, and it's something that's really came to my attention. That little scared boy's energy inside of me from the school playground and even beyond that. I didn't think there was a beyond that, but the more you kind of waken up, you see, hold on a minute here, this is from the cord was cut.
Yes.
And that's one of the things that one of the mistakes that I've made on my own path is like, whether it's a sponsor, like handing my power over to someone that doesn't know what to do with it.
Yes.
And then being disappointed at the outcome.
Yes. But I would be gentle, because your level of trauma is really high and you're such a kind human being. I have so much love for you. I want to say a mistake. I understand the language. This is how it is, brother. Like, we learn. Like, I've done lots of things. Like I said, they're mistakes. End of the day, this guy would never do them. So was it a mistake? No, that is what took me to learn this. Do you know what I mean? It's just like, we were talking earlier. I've been racing motorcycles since I was like 13 years old. As a 62-year-old guy, I'm sitting here still in one piece. Half of my shit doesn't work if I'm broken, because doing this when you're like this, you do that 2 times, you crash, then you learn like you can't crank the throttle. Was that a mistake? Sure, I can say it was a mistake, but that's the learning process. The main thing is you want to just get that mistake thing so you're not broken skull and broken spine. But that's the only way we'll learn.
Sure. Right?
So there's also like, there's a level that needs to be gentle there. I appreciate what you're saying, because the suffering is real, and I've been with you on your path for a while and I've observed, and you've been a hero, you've been really handling it well, and there's been a lot of betrayal. Given your history, man, it's amazing you're still alive. I'll say that to you. So like everything else, we forget, right? We forget that, and I say the same thing to myself. It's like we also need to sometimes be like that. And yes, anything where we've betrayed ourselves, any place where we've hurt other people, I would take that back in a second. I'm not capable of that, because that guy isn't here right now. This guy would never do those things. But this guy is the way he is because he had to have the shame of betraying himself or the shame of hurting somebody else. He was all unconscious. Now, you're a psychopath if you're at this age and you know it and you still do it, and that's a real thing, psychopathy, which this culture propagates like it's freaking candy through social media. People are so self-involved. Then we're talking about a different story. But unless you're aware of it and you don't do it, that's the whole point of the Kundalini thing. That's the whole work of it. There's a softness there.
Sure. The trauma part's such a tricky thing, though, because, you know, I've been on the spiritual path for many years before I even knew. I mean, people were, you know, I was probably picking it up and stuff, but I didn't know it on a deep enough level. There was so much delusion surrounding it, till I came to a point where, like, my behaviors are coming out of me sideways. And it was a friend of mine that said, dude, that's trauma. And he's a retired therapist now. And I said, dude, in all the years I've known you, why did you never tell me that before? He said, that wasn't really my job, dude.
It's beautiful.
You know, he says, you're my friend. He said,
it's beautiful.
So then when I kind of found out the trauma piece, you know, I'm turning for therapy. And then one of the dilemmas there can be, have you got the right therapist? Have you got the right model of therapy? And one of the models of therapy that I find that I'm actually working with right now, it's changed my life, man, is the internal family systems.
Right.
And because I've tried to work with different therapists over the years, and it's never really got in and opened that door, man. But we've opened that door now, and that's a whole nother terrifying experience, man, looking at that old wound.
Well, the IFS stuff, I love it. It's great that you're doing that. The internal family system is really wonderful. I would say this, in my experience, I've done this for 40 years. When the time is right, you know me, I'm not a new agey guy. That's why that guy told you that. You wouldn't have even heard it before. This is the amazing thing about it. There's a level where like there's free will, and they just need to look at the nature of the world. It just seems so happenstance. There's so much cruelty and craziness. And then we have these moments, which Carl Jung used to call synchronicities, where the odds of it are so strange. You're like, how the hell did that guy tell me that then? I've known this guy for so many years. These synchronicities, when you're on the path and you're very sincere about it, which I consider to be, those things happen. Those things actually happen. And then you find the right people. But even the wrong therapist is the right therapist, because I've had the wrong therapist that led me to the right therapist. This is a part of it.
Right.
Not to whitewash it, and again, discernment versus judgment. You know, I can tell you as a guy who is a therapist, the level of nutcases in my field, way more than not. Because why do I say that? Most healers, therapists are people, most, till they change it, where they're trying to heal themselves, fix themselves by trying to fix someone else. Then you get someone who's more cooked, who's actually trying to heal someone because they realize their healing, their own internal healing, is intertwined with that person's healing. That's a different story. So that comes through practice. You go to this person and then you find someone. Now, let's say for you in your case, doing this very deep work, you have to make room for that. You have a level of awakening that's very real, that's genuine. I've observed it for 10, 12 years. And there's a level where this little boy now is going to be re-experiencing these things. He needs to re-experience those to heal them. Right? And then this doesn't mean that this is taken away.
Yeah. Do you think Carl Jung had Kundalini?
I do, 100%. If you look at the red book.
I had the red book.
Yeah, if you look at the red book, look at the pictures of it.
Yeah.
Full on Kundalini, man.
It looks like Kundalini.
Totally, yeah. I mean, it's
the
like,
serpents and
he was a deep cat, right? I mean, like again, like there's all this stuff with his like inappropriateness with his patients and banging on his patients and all that, which was like, okay, it's the 1800s, late 1900s, but so there was like, again, crazy stuff there. But when you actually look at the stuff he came out with, it's incredible. And he spent a lot of time alone in that little castle-looking thing that he did, and he would talk to the pots and the pans. I mean, he was out there, but it was really in there.
Yeah.
Right? And the thing with this, the thing that, he split with Freud about, we don't need to get into that, but, he really tapped into some deep stuff. Like, he really got the magical aspect of it. The synchronicity thing is so profound, because it's been so active in my life, and I've treated 12,000, 13,000 people. I've seen that so many times, these big things, like the synchronicities that you had to experience, like me and you finding each other. What are the odds of me and you? You're in a city of 8 million people.
Yeah, it's
You know what I mean?
amazing.
These are synchronicity events, and like right away we recognize each other and we connect, and we've been in each other's lives now for over a decade. Like these are, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, happenstance, or you kind of can't make this shit up.
Yeah, it becomes so real that you can't steer around it.
You can't, and then the language is like, I was so apologetic for this as a guy who's got a science background. I would always like tiptoe around it. I don't want to say, but these magical things happen. Like, I had so many crazy magical things happen to me, especially in my 20s and 30s, like crazy magical stuff. Over and over and over. To the point where even a guy like me with my wounding and all the horrors I had seen in a child and civil wars and people chopping each other up, and it really just made me a believer, but a knower. It wasn't even a believer. As a guy with a very scientific mind, I was like, this is like, you cannot make this shit up. Like, how many of these things can happen that are 1 in a million? Over and over and over. So there's a part getting relaxed into things a little bit. Doesn't take away from the wounded part being scared all the time of like, I'm getting abandoned, which is the bottom line of what the Kundalini pushes against. But there's a part of just annoyingness in you.
Sure. I remember watching a piece on Carl Jung. I think he went to India in the 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And when he came back from India, he started to talk about Kundalini, and he said that we're probably 500 years away from it here in the West. And here we are. That's like 80, 100 years later. Guys like myself, just this ordinary person from Belfast that Tom this spontaneously awakens in. Now, when I came to you in 2012, was there other people coming to you with Kundalini? And what's been your experience? Has there been a pattern with Kundalini on your own journey or as a healer? Were people coming to you?
So it was. See, at the time when you came, people were coming to me. I was just talking to someone about this. So because I had it, I would talk about it. People would find me. It was just, again, synchronicity. From all around the world. A lot of these people I never met. It was through emails and all that. And a lot of it was just like what we did. I was like, you're not crazy. I've had the experience. Here's a roadmap I've seen. It might vary a little bit, but pretty much it's this. It's like 95 heading north. There might be Route 22 on the side, but it's pretty much heading the right way, a certain way. There were more people. They were from all walks of life. I love what you said. It's ordinary people, which I love. Except for one person who was a heavy meditator and actually had really messed himself up by doing a lot of third eye meditations, another trauma reaction. Everybody else was normal people, with no seriously spiritual patterns, which really threw them off because they had no roadmap for it. The guy was meditating literally 10 hours a day of doing this third eye thing. At least he had some language for it. So for ordinary people, there's no language for it. So that is correct. I saw a lot of it. Since then, and I say by a lot, like people were coming in and it was all very similar, and none of them, they were all Westerners. Actually, mostly American and European, except for one guy I was telling you about. But the other part that's happened more recently, I would say the last 5 to 7, 8 years, with the advent of all these medicines, people are having a similar thing. They're not the snake experience that me and you had, but it's the same kind of ego dissolving overnight. Mm-hmm. And they don't know what to do with it. What's interesting is very similar things. Then they think they're enlightened, and so the patterns are the same. Are they similar experiences? No, because they don't have the fear like we did. It wasn't elongated over months and months and months. But that part of it is interesting. So to answer your question, yes, a lot of people kind of died down a little bit, it seemed, and now it's come up again. People are in pain. This is the unconscious trying to wake up. What is Kundalini? The unconscious becoming conscious. We can use Carl Jung's language.
I love that.
So it's not working, man. You just gotta look outside. We gotta look at the weather, look at what we're doing to each other, look at whatever, conspiracy theories, this, that, this. The level of pain people are in is no joke.
You've mentioned plant medicines a few times, ayahuasca, psilocybin, MDMA. I was a big fan of MDMA back in my rave days, man. I mean, if you want to feel close to God, that's probably the closest I've ever felt.
Yeah,
But with the music and the lifestyle around it, probably not so godlike.
Yeah.
But I get a lot of people, not a lot, but enough people to get my attention that are calling me with like plant medicine questions. And a lot of people seem intrigued by it at the minute. And they're not sure whether they should take it or not. And, I'm like you, I would never tell someone whether they should or they shouldn't. But in a general way, who should and who shouldn't?
It's a great question. So I'm working on this paper right now with 2 psychiatrists, PhD, psychologist, who was the person who was dealing with it, and I'm the acupuncturist who treated her. So this woman was doing MDMA, profoundly heavy-duty woman, adore her, known her for a while. She had a breakdown with the MDMA, not in a good way, because the person who was handling it wasn't handling it right. So part of the thing that I say to people is like, it's only got like positive rep. It's great, do it. First of all, I would say, what's your intention? What's your psychological makeup? How much stress is in your life? Who's the person who's administering it? One of the things that blows my mind, just especially with the heavy duty stuff like ayahuasca or the psilocybin, ayahuasca being one, I was around it for 40 years. I've only met one person I can say 100% could handle the energy that gets released from the unconscious and not let it stick to people. That stuff is dead real, right? See now people playing guitar and clapping. I mean, ayahuasca, or the music, the sound, this is high technology. This is not some cute thing that was being done. So I would say really be conscious who you're doing it with, right? And I would also apply the same thing I was saying about therapists or healers, like have they done their own inner work? You will sit with someone and know it. Any kind of off energies that are there will get absorbed by you. The stuff that I'm saying, the dieta, for example, the diet that you would do before a medicine journey, these are evolutionary, very specific things passed on. So people just don't willy-nilly do things. So who would do it? I would first say, what's your intention? My experience with a lot of people who do this in medicines isn't a mystification, is they want to get high. Go for it. Then call it that. Don't tell me you want to know God, for lack of a word, you know yourself. You want relief from everyday life? That's a different experience. Right? And it doesn't matter. People are like, MDMA is not a big deal. Well, MDMA is speed. First of all. Yes, it opens the heart chakra. I've used it for years with vets. I've used it with incredible medicine. But I would also say, who are you going to do it with? What is the level of this stuff? So there's a level where we don't really make room for the unconscious. It's very willy-nilly that way. And I would always say with any person that asks you that, my first thing is like, what's your intention? And end of the day, are you really ready? If the medicine actually gives you what me and you were given with the Kundalini, are you really ready to answer? People don't answer that either. It's not just something you're going to do for 12 hours. What if it's just 12 hours, you have a nice little visit with God for an afternoon, like Baba used to say? What do you want to live with God? And what are we talking about? We're talking about a more open consciousness, less of this, more of this. Are you ready for that? Well, to go from this to this, there's a lot that's going to be given up. There are things that are killing you, but do we want to give that up? So I would say, like, go to it seriously. Go answer these things seriously. These are serious things. By serious, what I mean, there can be a long road. So if you got 9 million things going on, you're going to throw this one just this weekend, might change your life very drastically.
Well, so what would you say to someone who has kind of like been a little rash, bull runty and rushed into it, and neither reality's changed and they're kind of in trouble?
So tell me, ask me more specifically.
Well, what about someone who's, decided to take ayahuasca and they've had a totally bad experience and they're kind of stuck in that place?
Yeah, so then you need therapy. I would say, so the one person I'm working with, this paper that we're writing is about that. I mean, this woman is obviously, this woman had done a lot of work on herself, done a lot of therapy on herself, but her nervous system had a really adverse reaction, and part of it was just the situation and where she was, and this is another thing that drives me absolutely batty. It's a healing crisis. Not go fuck yourself, man. No, it's not a healing crisis. It's like, this is someone suffering. It's just that, it's one of the things that really pet peeves of mine with healers have been done to me, I see it done to people. It's a healing crisis. That's a really cruel thing to say to someone. No, it's not a healing crisis. It's someone's nervous system had a steep, deep crash. So I would say definitely get some kind of body work, acupuncture, craniosacral work, can be very powerful. Something like reflexology, that's grounding, is very powerful. Certainly pay attention to your diet. Certainly use some supplements to get your nervous system under control. B vitamins are very important. B complex, B12. So there's a nervous system component to it. And then work with someone who has an experience with these things. It's a great time to work with a good therapist that is very good at working with unconscious material. If you've had a nightmarish experience, there's stuff that's coming up to be released. It could be just on an electromagnetic level, nervous system level. It can be on a deeper psychological level. That's what I would say. And by the way, brother, I see this a lot. I do see this.
So it doesn't have to be classified as a terrible experience. It can definitely be a learning experience.
Yeah, I don't really believe it's a terrible experience. I really believe it's something that can be addressed. Now, I can count on one hand where I've seen people. There was one person I knew 40 years ago who consumed over 40 grams of psilocybin, dried psilocybin. And, he never recovered.
It's a hero's dose?
Oh yeah, hero's dose is 5 grams,
The
right?
man's son?
Yeah, and that's like a superhero. So it was 40 plus grams, and he was a young, we were all young then. I was like 18, 19, he was 18, 19. At the time I didn't have any shamanic experience like I do now. He would have needed a soul connection. He refracted, his soul refracted. He never was the same. So I would also say, don't just wing these things. Terrence McKenna, amazing guy that I studied with back in the day, he would say always, there are old shamans and there are bold shamans. There are no old, bold shamans. That stuck with me. It means you can't just wing this stuff, right? It's like, and so the whole thing of a soul retrieval and shamanic journeys that we do is for that, because you can really refract it. That person, the last time I saw him was 25 years ago. Sweetheart, sweet man. Something dissolved in him. He actually refracted. If I can describe it, he broke. So the guy that was very engaging that I knew wasn't there anymore. And he never came back. So I'm saying, pay attention. It's a serious thing. That's a very extreme case. But I'm saying, it's a thing. It's a thing. The more dangerous that I've seen isn't the bad experience. The bad experience, again, look at the unconscious, because too much stuff comes up. You got to really roll your sleeves up and work on it, or work as a person who's injured, because that's how your life's going to be. You're just going to be as someone who's got broken their arm, doesn't want to go to the doctor. You can live like this the rest of your life, but difference. But the thing that I see a lot is the ego aggrandizement. That's what I see. That's the biggest danger. If I say it's one thing that I see commonly, people think they're special. We're unique, we're not special. So that's the biggest danger I see with all those medicines. And the crazy thing is, to me, like you, I love the MDMA. Therapeutically, it really helped me. Before that, I used to love doing it as a fun drug back in the day. For me to see MDMA, people having an MDMA experience and thinking they're enlightened, that blew my mind. Ayahuasca, I could see it. So I was like, the one thing that's a hard drug, how the hell do you get freaking into an ego boost out of that? Holy moly, did that become that too, right? So the psyche is an amazing thing. We'll use anything. And it's a defense mechanism, right? We're not assholes that we do this. Why do we want to be Jesus Christ? Because it's so painful to be Abdi. It's so painful to be ordinary. But actually the magic isn't ordinary. The ordinary is the magical. The magical is not what we think it is.
Sure.
Right? Would you say that's your experience?
Yeah, absolutely, man. Yeah. It's taken so many kind of twists and turns, my journey. It's brought me to a place where, all the magical experiences and stuff that I've had, they were great and they were real and stuff. Do they really matter to me anymore? Not really. What matters to me is right now, man. It's,
I love what you're saying.
It's hard to navigate what's going on right now. And I've learned my lesson with all that stuff. You've talked about ego aggrandizement and stuff. I remember when I was trying to explain to my sister about the Kundalini, there was a strong part of me wanted to tell her that this is what Jesus had, but there was a part of me knew that, no, don't say that, And I can imagine that there's people that don't have that other voice saying, no, don't say this. They're so and I've seen it.
Well, they're in Bellevue.
Yeah, I've seen it, man. It's like, okay. So there's a lot of things I'm glad I didn't say.
The people in the white coats will come grab you for that. So there's also a level I would say that people have this experience. Again, because of it's more commonplace now, especially a certain level of consciousness with certain groups of people. Back in the day when you had it, it was super rare. So now there's so many tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people are doing medicines on the weekend. There's more language. The thing is, if you don't have that discernment, they'll come block you up. What happened to that guy that I told you about with the 40 grams? I was a young kid. I was trying to explain to this doctor, it's psilocybin. It's like, people have no idea. It's like 43 years ago. Yeah. I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. Thorazine, straitjacket. The last thing I saw him before they wouldn't let me stay with him, they put him in a straitjacket. I knew it was so wrong doing it as an 18-year-old kid. I was trying to tell the docs, like, don't do that. So we're in a different place with that. But I don't know about you, like there's a moment where you actually miss the magical. When all these incredible things happen, you hear voices, you see things, and then there's a moment you actually miss it. You're like, that was like being in a warm shower. Like, I don't necessarily like the cooler shower.
Mm-hmm.
But then when you come through outside, you're like, you can look at it sweetly. It's like looking at a sweet experience you had as a kid. And then like now you're a grown up. So you don't necessarily miss it because like it did what it did, but it's also, what was it? It's like having a sweet drink.
I think it was part of me missed it.
You must.
From being afraid of it to like,
yeah.
shit, life's back to kind of mundane now.
Well, so that's a big thing. I certainly did. But I had these crazy experiences. I remember going cross country on a motorcycle at this really crazy Italian bike that had a very specific front tire, it's Moto Guzzi, which nobody had. It was a 16-inch tire, nobody had them. And me and been, I don't know, in the middle of nowhere, man. I was like outside of somewhere in bumfuck New Mexico. And I remember like literally being like, I need a new front tire. I wish I brought one with me. No one has this. Picking up the phone, calling through, sending some Motel 6, calling somewhere, and, the guys that we have it, I'm like, I can't find this. I'm like, well, where are you, man? He's like, where are you? I'm like, I'm Motel 6 and, off, whatever, highway, blah, blah, blah. He was like, look outside your window. Are you in the front or the back? I was like, I'm in the back. He's like, look outside your window. Open the freaking window. And the guy at the bike shop is literally someone's house behind the motel that I'm staying at. Like the level of these magical things that would happen was like that. So of course I would miss that sometimes. I would miss these magical things. It was like crazy. I mean, that story, the odds of having someone who have that bike in Malone, it was like zero. And somehow this guy had it. I don't know what it was even a crazy story how he had it. Yeah, you miss those magical moments because it's a connection. But if you tolerate that, and then there's a moment of boredom, but then what happens is literally this moment then becomes magical, right? It actually is that. I mean, look at the light hitting off that wood stove.
Beautiful, man.
Just look at that. And then the steam coming off the pot, off of that. Like, that's simplicity, right?
Sure.
It's that. It's like, that's magical to me. I look at that, it's just my heart opens. Right? So it's like, this is a level that we start being here now. Where it's not like, I may actually hear voices and stuff. It was like amazing, great things that would tell me. But now I just look at that, I'm like, wow.
Beautiful. Present.
Yes.
And that's the thing, you become more present. That's been my experience. You become more present and like the consciousness it expands more.
So
what does that look like for you at this point in your own journey with like consciousness and presence?
So the thing is from this to this. It's from this to this. Right? Like I've been sitting here talking to you. I'm so present. I haven't seen you in a while. It's so lovely connecting. Met your lovely friend. It's your lovely soul. It's just I'm totally aware of his energy. I'm aware of his being present. It's such a magical part. The three of us, it's three men sitting here. I'm really loving that. I'm really aware that it's our first sunny day in freaking 2 months up here in the darkness. I'm here fully. Right? I'm hearing the noises upstairs. I'm hearing the birds outside on my bird feeder. It's this level of being here. And I catch it. Another days I'm like, I can go into depression today. What happened? Bum, bum, bum. I'm not going to go there. I can go into a story about anxiety, about what I need to be next month. I'm not going to go there. I catch them. It's not like, it's not that, but it's a level of it. And I go like, there's these last years, whatever is left, I'm also at that stage of life. I'm like, I really would choose today to have this experience.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
It's, you just reminded me there, it's like Nisargadatta. Someone asked him, you're enlightened, does your mind not come ever and try to hook you? Oh, he goes, it does all the time. I just don't believe it.
I love him, man. I am that. It's one of those books that's just like I've read so many times over. Like just now you remind me I'm going to read it again. Like to me again, talking about punk rock guys like us or punk rockers, like he was like Sid Vicious, man. Like Ramana Maharshi is the Beatles. Like he was such a badass. And the way he would just cut through things. Like, I was just telling to someone a couple of weeks ago, like he would do pujas. And people were like, Guruji, like you're enlightened. Why the hell do you go and rub your master's picture? It was like, well, I'm still alive. I gotta do something. Like you would always have these like off the cuff things of like literally that. And the thing that he said that, I love that line. I always remember that line. I just don't believe it.
Just don't believe it.
But it's doing it, right? But to your point here, this is a really important point. we're sold a bill of goods. I don't know if we were sold it or we started believing it or no one really explained it to us. As Westerners, we kind of thought that when you become enlightened, it's literally like, blank mind. It isn't that. And I feel like it really might get to that. It doesn't matter to me. I just know that every day it's just got to lay a little bit off. Like, don't make friends with these neurotic voices. Don't make friends with this voice that wants to be anxious. Don't make friends with those. And just make friends with just the presence. That's a choice. That part, that's volitional. Right? You just make the choice. Like, your mind can go into this place, you make the choice. And like I was saying before, anytime these things, like I want to have a cigar now, I want to have a cigarette, have it. Are you just doing it because now you're ready to do it, or are you doing it because it's a reflection of some anxiety? Pay attention to that. That alone is like a very powerful pointer.
I'm really glad you said that, because I was going to ask you, what would you say to someone who probably doesn't have access to therapy or, access to, good spiritual tools on the path, that is struggling with an addiction or something? What would you say to them? What's a good starting place?
I would literally say, whenever you're going to pick up, when you're about to pick up, when you think about the drink, the cigarette, the food, first of all, just feel. It can be 5 seconds. All right, you're going to call the dealer and get your 8-bottle of Coke. Well, feel it. Like, what the hell am I feeling? Like, and actually start naming it. I feel anxious. That'll definitely be there for most people. I feel empty. That'll definitely be there. And then, what are the things in your life that you can change, or at least be aware of, that are killing you? And there'll always be a bunch of things there. Might be some shit job you don't like with an asshole. You gotta pay your bills. So that one you can't do anything about. Learn to either invest less psychically or pay attention to, is it a pattern that you repeated before? Pay attention to people, places, things. Who are the friends? Are they really your friends? Are you able to connect? Are you a caretaker? Are you hiding and tap dancing to be loved? Just paying attention to those things, that'll give you a different relationship. We think addiction happens in a vacuum. Addiction is a reaction to pain. Yes, there's genetic components. Everybody in my family is fucking opium addicts, so of course that's going to be it's deeper than that. What are the other aspects? Pay attention to what are the behaviors in your life that are killing you. Some you can control, right? Maybe work you can, but the other things. So for me, one of the things I always work with substances, but even now, I have a sweet tooth and I really try not to have sugar. If I'm having a thing for a sweet tooth, there'll always be something. It's amazing. I've got it to the point when I don't eat the sweets the way I did. There'll be something I did in the betrayal. I worked too hard. I had some really difficult patients, working with someone who's dying. Didn't take care of myself. Then I ran into another session. Those things directly lead to the addiction. The addiction is just an action trying to soothe pain. Where is the pain coming from?
Sure. And here's a different question with a kind of different spin on it. So those deep, dark parts of those deep, dark, unconscious parts of yourself, how can you send love to those and how can you heal those?
Great question. First of all, you have to become aware of them. You have to first, if you just work on them not being the enemy, and so many times we're not aware of them. So the thing that I always used to talk about, how do I become aware of these dark parts? Look at someone that you hate. Those are aspects of yourself you haven't, we all have them, right? Trump, Biden, this fucking asshole. Like, those energies, start linking them. What aspect of myself is not accepted? What aspect of myself am I projecting out? Those aspects are aspects inside your unconscious. The problem with the unconscious is that it's unconscious, we don't know it. What energies are you putting out? What is that you're trying to project out, that you're trying to hide? The thing you're trying to hide, that's your unconscious you haven't accepted. I am always this, I'm always that, but what is underneath it? The trick with the unconscious, you have to become aware of it. Once you become aware of it, the rest of it happens. The idea of loving those parts, you become aware of them, they'll sort itself out. The loving thing, I find that doesn't even really work. You have to first become conscious of it, then it shifts. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, totally does. It really does, and I love your answer. So where are we going with all this, man? Where's it going to take me? You're on down the line from me.
Peace. It's peace. Don't get bored with the peace. Don't get bored with the peace. The reality of life isn't right. Like, we want to live in a certain place, we got to make a certain amount of money. That's just, it's real, we have to work with that. But we're talking about this peace is peace. And one thing that's really happened culturally, when I was 20 years old, there were people like me who were really seeking. I don't see people seeking as much. And that's by design. I always say culture is not your friend. So when people are really not in so much anxiety with the social media, with the distraction, with what's happening with the planet, with all the things that's going on, spend a little bit of time getting to know yourself. This stranger has to become a friend. So what we're going with it is not to be yo-yoed by every news that comes up and somebody's saying something and the craziness of this plane. End of the game is always that. The end game is to be at peace. And at peace doesn't mean you're going to have a panic attack about something and then you calm yourself down. That's what it is. It's to have serenity. But it's such a great word. What does that mean? It's actually very common. Again, just looking at that thing that we just looked at, just looking at the light and looking at the steam coming off of it and looking at the blackness of the actual stove. What happens there? Your mind stops for a second. All the stuff that's going on stops. So what is it at the end of the day? Silence, because now you're hearing the clankety clank of the little stove. It's that. This is the isness, the suchness.
I can hear it and feel it in here. There's a great energy in here. You can feel the stillness.
Because I do that all day long.
That's a nice move. And, you know, I like what you've kind of put out there in your message for a long time, too, is getting into the body and the breath. And getting out of the head, man. That's been great for me. I do it every day.
This is the addiction, right? Addiction comes from the head, doesn't come from the body. The body does not want cigarettes. The body does not want coke. The body vomits at that stuff. I remember having these experiences when I was actually really deep in my addiction, even as a young guy. I just could feel it, how my body didn't want it. Like I've done so much coke and your nose is bleeding, your arms, and then the mind is like, do more. The body's just like, gee, no. And I remember just shutting it down and going back to the head. That's the level of pain we're in. So the body thing is really profound. And I always say to you, if I say, hey Adrian, try to relax, oxymoron, if I have you just feel your feet, just like you've really dropped in now, feel your hands, it gives you that moment of serenity. The body thing is really huge. The people that taught me that was really powerful. I remember as a guy who did martial arts for a long time, it was amazing. I could really do it when I was doing martial arts. The second I left the dojo or the mat, I was back to like doing this. And I was like, oh my God, you do all that training, you can actually do this all day long. Right, you can like really feeling our feet right now, feeling our butts, feeling our backs. Just that kinesthetic awareness. That's godliness. That's how the divine speaks to us.
Yeah, the body's a piece of the journey that...
Huge.
And I totally disregarded it, man. I didn't know.
Everyone does. I mean, that's what these older cultures had on us. Like when you look at the Japanese, the Zen stuff, the martial arts stuff, the yogis, you know, they sat on the floor, they ate on the floor. They were way more embodied than us. This is something that never translated over. I learned that through decades of sitting with these cats. That's the part that they missed. They didn't realize how disconnected we were as Westerners, and that's why some of their teachings got so whacked out. We didn't get how different they are than us, right? And that's where all this PMS stuff came up. I spent a lot of time looking at this stuff. I spent so much time in different meditations and martial arts and, you know, yogi. I spent a lot of time in that world. And I was like, it clicked one day. That was a disconnection. We are so pure ahead and they're not.
Beautiful.
Right.
Well, Abdi, you know, I really appreciate the opportunity to
So lovely to see you, man.
came to your home. You know, you made us very welcome, but not just that, man. You know, for over a decade now, you've really, out of everybody that I've met has helped me, man. But you've always showed up fully for me, and I really appreciate it, man. You've helped me so much today.
So beautiful here.
I don't know if you have a closing statement or anything you want to say, or...
I just love you because you're Irishman. I love the Irish.
Love you too, man. Thanks, brother. Thank you very much.
Yep.